we're going to be talking about some Battletech. Love the game, love the universe, been playing it for a long time, and we are going to be doing a tier list of the original 3025, technical readout 3025 baseline variants, factory variants. We're not going to go into all the different variants, we would be here forever, but we're going to do a bit of a tier list of the baseline Battlemechs for 3025. Classic little thing from Tier Maker here. We're going to go along with Would Own, Would Pilot, Take or Leave, Walking Coffin, or Scrap. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to start off. I'm going to start off on the list, and what we have here, we have the Locust LCT-1V. Locust. It's fast, it's nippy, it is the epitome of the scout mech. It is ludicrously quick, especially for its era, 3025. And I would pilot a Locust. I wouldn't necessarily want to own one, although I do for many mercenary companies and many different games, but I would not want necessarily to own one of my own, but piloting a Locust, yeah, it's absolutely acceptable. Does its job 100% of the time, which is to be quick. It gets in the back, it scouts, it's got its medium laser, it's got its machine guns. You don't want to get hit. You know, speed is life with the Locust. More than perhaps any other mech on the list, it is absolutely critical to keep the Locust moving. If you can't do that, Locust is dead and it's not worth it. Otherwise, it's a solid mech. It's a solid mech, which brings us to the second one. The second one on this tier list. And that is the Wasp. WSP-1 Wasp. Noise going off in the background there. And the Wasp is, again, it's the original Scout mech. It is the original Scout mech. It's not as fast as the Locust, but it does have the jump jets. Its default configuration, it does have the medium laser. It has an SRM-2, handy for both regular missile fire, and it could also mount Infernos. And back in the day, Infernos were really scary. In 3025, you did not want to be hit by Infernos. Modern rules, current rule set, Infernos are nowhere near as scary as they used to be, but this rule, the old rule set, originally when the Locust, the Wasp, and all these 3025 mechs were written, you wanted to avoid Infernos as much as you could, even if you were something light and heat efficient. The Wasp, for me, is a fantastic mech for its era. Outside of the era later on, even the improvement to the Wasps, it doesn't hold up. But in 3025, it absolutely does its job. It's got some speed, it's got some maneuverability, and if you can put Infernos in that leg launcher, delicious. It is brilliant. Now, on to the third mech. We have a Stinger. Interesting design. It moves like a Wasp, shoots like a Locust. And for me, it doesn't really do it, which is a shame because it's one of the original mechs. It's a Veritech fighter from Robotech or Macross, but I find it inferior to the two other mechs. I really do. I know that sounds crazy. But it's not as good as the Locust. What the Locust does, it's not as good as the Wasp. What the Wasp does, even though in theory the damage output is the same, and in theory the maneuverability of the jump jet to the Stinger should mean it can make the better use of those machine guns. It absolutely should. It really, really should. But it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. Disappointing is what the Stinger is. I mean, I've seen them pull off some stuff, but no. Not for me. Now, the Commando. Carries a lot of firepower for mech its size. It is the epitome of glass cannon. See, it's got a land speed that is the same as the Wasp and the Stinger. It's got a lot of firepower, but it punches like a medium, but it can't take a hit like a medium, and it doesn't have the extra maneuverability, because when to make use of those weapons to the best of its ability, it gets into trouble that it cannot get out of. Now, there's a couple of variants for sure. The that make it interesting. I mean, it's cool with the SRM6 and the large laser. That large laser gives it an interesting amount of standoff firepower. But if you're trying to make it best effect of it, unless you want a fairly quick sniper, you don't want it. You don't want the commando. You really don't. It gets into trouble that it can't get out of too often. Gets in trouble that it can't get out of too often. Now, yeah, it can take out mechs of equal weight, but it doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold up. Conversely, the javelin goes in the same box. No. I can take or leave the javelin. The javelin's missile complement means it's more tied into that range bracket. It more knows what it's about, what it's trying to do. It can get an extra turn of speed on it over the commando. So it doesn't tend to get itself into trouble as much as the commando. The commando tries to be a heavier mech than it is. The javelin does not. Is what I'm saying there. But I can take it or leave it. I don't like the early javelin. I don't think it's a great design. I can absolutely take it or leave it. But it's not something I would want to play around with too much. The Spider, yeah, this thing in 3025 is a nightmare. It's 2 medium lasers with a running package like a locust and a jumping package that makes a wasp seem unagile. It is, and it's 30 tons. It is incredible. This thing is beautiful for its weight class. Absolutely is. It's a phenomenal piece of work. If you know how to use it, if you don't know how to use a spider, you'll die quick. This thing will absolutely punish you if you don't understand what you're doing with it. If you do, this thing will absolutely reward you. It is an amazing piece of kit, and it holds up into later material too. It does struggle with between heat for its guns and it jumping, like a lot of light mechs do. There's always a heat consideration. There's a heat burden. Another problem the commander has is a little bit of that heat burden. Same goes for all of them. And if anything gets by an inferno, yeah, you just run away for several turns. But the spider, in the hands of someone who knows what they're doing, beautiful battle mech. Absolutely fantastic battle mech. And I have just realised that the name of my stream is completely wrong. It's completely wrong. So we're gonna change it on the fly. See if we can. Battletech 3025 tier list, because I'm new at this and we make things. Tier list. I'll go with knife, and we're going to cut that out. We're going to put a Battletech. Pop those off for the time being. Okay, Mech Warrior. Okay, stream is successfully updated, because we really should have had that information out there. But that's okay, and we're still learning, we're still doing some things, and that's fine. And when I come to doing the video, I'm going to edit that bit out. Is what I'm going to do. So, we come to a massive community fan favourite. We come to the Urban Mech. It's a great idea. It's a lovely thing to have the memes, to have the comedy, to have so much stuff about it. And it's really cheap in terms of C-bills, battle value, whatever you're using, whichever systems you are using. However, it is scrap. It is great. It pops out, it might get a shot off. It doesn't really have the manoeuvrability to do what it wants to do. If you've got anything higher than a level 2 building, it can't jump over it. So 2 jump jets are wasted. It's a 2-3-2. It's so slow. It is a walking target. You might as well use tanks. Armour is what you want, really, if you're going into a city fight like that. Urban Mech, no. No. Now, some of the later conversions, some of the things where they do crazy things with that AC-10 gun arm, for sure. So you want a cheap mobile way of putting something on a battlefield? Yeah, okay. But 3025 urban mech? Nah. Nah. The Valkyrie. I love the Valkyrie. I really do. It's a bit slower than the Wasp and the Stinger, but it's a light fire support Battlemech. It's got a laser. The laser is an attending weapon. It is a jumping LRM-10 launcher. That's what you have a Valkyrie for. You can brawl with the medium laser. In 3025, the medium laser is a happy weapon to brawl with, and it can take a couple of hits. But it is a mobile support weapon platform, mostly for things like the Wasp and the Locust, and the Stingers, Javelins, Commandos, anything like that. This brings a little bit of long-range firepower to stand off and shoot stuff while your other mechs are getting close. That's what it's doing, and then it carries on doing that, and it remains a mobile platform around the table. It has a mobility that the Commando lacks. It has a mobility that really rewards its weapons package. Ironically, I prefer the original Valkyrie over things like the later Valkyrie. Later Valkyrie puts pulse lasers into it, which, you start blurring the lines a little bit. It has one knife fighting weapon and an LRM system. It's not as good. But medium laser, LRM-10, not a perfect pairing in terms of full bracket, but it can jump and fire that LRM forever. Or it can move to a position and fire the LRM forever. And if it needs to do a little bit of infighting, the medium laser is a respectable weapon. 3025, do not discount a medium laser. Never discount that medium laser. Even late, do not discount the medium laser. But there's a reason statistically the medium laser is the best weapon on paper. The fire starter. Don't like it. It's a very niche mech doing a very niche job that's better done with Inferno launchers. Okay, more modern rule set, but bear in mind these mechs were not made and designed with the modern rule set, they were made and designed with the original rule set. So that has to colour how you look at them. And the OG rule set, a Wasp is a better fire starter than a fire starter when it comes to doing some of this stuff. But it's okay. It's very okay, but it's very meh for the weight class it's doing. It's not putting out... It can take a hit, I suppose, but it's not putting in the same kind of work that some of its lighter cousins are. It's not putting in the work that the heavier cousins are. It's an anti-infantry mech with flamers. And it's disappointing. It has potential. Later variations of the chassis, and even some variants outside the core presented in TRO 3025 have that potential. But the core fire starter, it's just not going to help you on the battlefield. Not in a way that something else wouldn't do better. Speaking of something else doing something better, the Jenner. I would not own a Jenner. I would happily pilot a Jenner. This is a nasty piece of work. Quad medium lasers, SRM4. Doesn't have the full jump range of its movement, but it doesn't need it. This thing is fast. It can close that distance. It can lacerate. It can get out. It has those jump jets just so it can shift out of a tight situation, or it can shift into a compromising situation. It can take advantage of any opening that comes up. Heat management is its main issue. It's 3025, heat management, everything's issue. The Jenner can really burn itself on heat management. It really can. But it handles it better than so many other things, and sometimes you just get that lineup and 4 lasers and an SRM4 rack. It hits so hard when it wants to. This thing is a terror. But it does have a few armor issues. The heat management is an issue. It's why I wouldn't own it. I wouldn't own it. I would want to be rebuilding it a little bit if I owned it. And would own means I'm happy with it enough that I would take it as it stands at the C-bill cost, at the battle value cost, as what it is. But I would happily put a Jenner on the field. Just not necessarily one that I would do. It's very, very much between these two. Very, very much. The Os Scout is scrap. Simple as that. The original Os Scout doesn't do anything. Doesn't have weapons, has an electronics package that back in the day you had to really work hard to find the rules for. It's a lovely narrative piece of Battlemech design, but it is just scrap. It is a very expensive piece of scrap for what it does. Later on, when they kind of play around with the Os Scout, yeah, you can actually do things. It's got beagle probes and stuff, but even then, they're making better stuff. There are better designs. In 3025, there's no reason to have this unless you are playing the RPG. One of the original RPGs, and you are getting RPG value out of an Os Scout. That is it. We're talking tabletop. There is no reason. I'm sorry for the sniffing. I'll get a little bit of pollen in the air. There is no reason whatsoever to have this in your force. There isn't. Absolutely not. The Panther. I'd be happy to own a Panther. I really would. It's solid. It makes good use of its frame to put a PPC onto the battlefield. An SR4, but it's not quick. It's not quick, but it's almost a medium mech. And unlike the Commando that can kind of hit like a medium and then gets absolutely splattered if it tries to hang around to do it, the Panther is slower, but it can fight. That PPC, which is a standoff weapon, PPC, 3 hex minimum range, can absolutely exchange some shots, and that can really put some hurt where you don't want hurt. You can crack a cockpit. Crack a fully armoured cockpit with a PPC. They're not head cappers, but they scare people. And it's got a Crit Seeker SM4 backing it up. It ain't quick. It's not quick, but it doesn't have to be. It can just really lend a massive punch where you need, especially if you've got a recon lance made up of stuff like this. The Panther can absolutely lend a punch where a punch needs to go. Break armor, open up for crit seeking. It can finish stuff off. It can be an absolute nightmare. It can be a bullet sponge for a short while. It won't take punishment like anything heavier can. Of course it's not going to. But recon lance and light lance, yeah, it will take fire and it will give back better than it gets. It's a fantastic little design. It's the Panther. Again, heat management is key. It's 3025, almost nothing with the exception of the Locust doesn't have heat problems. Everything else starts having heat problems really quickly. Yeah, Panther, absolutely solid mech. The Assassin, it's not useless. It's not scrap. But it can't do what its name says. It feels very underwhelming for a mech of its weight class. It's 5 tons heavier than the Panther, or possibly even 10 tons heavier. No, it's 5 tons heavier than the Panther. And it cannot deliver on what it needs to do. It's quick for what it is. And I'm normally a fan of autocannons. I like autocannons, especially again old Inferno rules. Some of the older rules, autocannons are really, really, really good. But the Assassin absolutely struggles to function without support. It really, really does. It can provide a nice blind side, but it never feels like it's really a threat. Panther's a bigger threat than an Assassin. I mean, the firepower's only a little bit better than the Wasp. Okay, you can take more of a punch than the Wasp, but still. Assassin feels very disappointing for its classification of where it's supposed to be. Which brings us to the Cicada, which is essentially an upgunned, upscaled Locust in the way it performs on the field. I can take or leave a Cicada. Has a few issues with its loadouts. Feels a bit undergunned for chassis weight, but it's got the speed to deliver it. It's got the speed to deliver it. It just feels like it's an expensive Locust. It's not adding a massive amount of punch where you need a massive amount of punch. I mean, yeah, it can do. It can stab a bit, but it does feel, again, very mid-ground for what is a fast. It's fast. It's a fast medium mech. But it feels like it's got too much speed and not enough hit for something that's sitting in its weight bracket and what it's meant to do. It just doesn't do it. Doesn't work. Okay, we're getting to some things that you don't see very often now. A Clint is a middle of the road mech. This is the most boring Fedcom mech, or Federated Suns mech, I think there is in design. I mean, to be fair, it's default mech. It's got middling speed. It's got okay armor. It's got okay. It's okay. A Clint is okay, and that's about all you can say for a Clint. Which isn't not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you could be stuck in a lot worse. You could be stuck in better. But it is meh. For me, the Clint is the definition of meh when it comes to mech design. It's not trying to fulfill a niche. It's trying to be an average mech. And it succeeded. Well done. But you're average. Okay, the Hermes 2. Tricky with the Hermes 2. I would pilot Hermes 2. It's quick. It's kind of like the Cicada in that it's quick. But it just seems to deliver a little more. It hasn't got the speed edge on the Cicada, but it can tend to get similar numbers in practical play, in practical usage, rather than just looking at the stats on paper. A Hermes 2 can deliver similar numbers to the Cicada in terms of its speed, maneuverability, and where you want it to be. And do a better job when it's there. And that's all there is to it. There's nothing particularly fancy and particularly exciting about it. That's just the way it works. And then we've got the Vulcan, and the Vulcan is scrap. It's an anti-infantry mech that's bad at doing anti-infantry, which makes it even all the worse. Flamethrowers, AC2. It's got a standoff plink with the AC2, but there's not a lot to the Vulcan. It wants to be something so much more, and it could be so much more, but I'd rather just put it in the trash compactor or sell it for C-bills. Vulcan is awful. Vulcan is bad. Vulcan is very bad. And that's a shame, that is. Really, because the Vulcan looks cool. It's got a really unique kind of look to it. Line art isn't great, obviously, in what we're currently playing with in the tier maker, but it does look cool. But that's not it's not what I want, though. The Whitworth. This is such a maligned mech. It really is. I in certain communities you hear the Whitworth getting a lot. It's a mini Archer in some respects, the Whitworth. So is the Dervish, which we'll come up to later, but the Whitworth it's good at what it does. It doesn't do a lot, but it's good at what it does. It's got its lasers, it's got its missile launchers, it's got an okay movement profile. Sometimes it jumps. Can't remember if the core one does or doesn't now. I'd have to have a look, see if the very first one jumped. But the Whitworth, it's a much maligned mech. Again, it's almost like the Clint, in that the Clint was trying to be an average mech, but the Whitworth falls a little bit more into a niche. And if you can fall into a niche and be just good enough, it's perfect. And the Whitworth can really sort of surprise people. It really can. You never know what's going to happen. And the Whitworth can absolutely surprise me. I wouldn't necessarily want to own one, but I'd get in a Whitworth. I'd get in a Whitworth, no problem. Okay, Blackjack. Blackjack. It's going there. It's going there. It's got quad lasers. It's got its 2 autocannons. It doesn't have a lot of heat problems. It's got an okay armour. But I can take it or leave it. I don't. It doesn't dominate a field role. Quad medium lasers, if it gets close, it can be terrifying, but it does, again, like a lot of things do, have a heat burden. And 4 medium lasers adds up, although it can put 3 into something quite happily and not have to worry too much. So it's got the firepower, it's got the stuff that's there, it's got its autocannons for some nice standoff plinking. But therein lies the problem. You've got to sacrifice the utility of those 2 plinkers to bring the medium lasers into action, and it's not quite got the manoeuvre, but it's probably about as manoeuvrable as a lot of other medium mechs, but it feels like it wants to do one thing or another. Anti-air, if you've got some aircraft going around, a bit of flak off AC-2s, knocking VTOLs and aerospace fighters and conventional at the sky, for sure. But it wouldn't be a choice. I could take it or leave it. You know, if I need something very, very specialist I wanted AC-2s for, I probably would put a Blackjack on the field if I just need a pair of AC-2s sitting there. And for whatever reason I couldn't get a Pike tank, which has 3 of them. But there we go, that's a Blackjack. And then we come to... It's awesome. It's fantastic. It's not really, but it's a hatchetman. And if you can get a hatchetman into range with that hatchet, it's pretty fun. More for the psychological factor, the effort people will put into avoiding close combat with a mech with a hatchet, a lot of the time is quite funny to watch. And for that reason alone, I would absolutely own a hatchetman. 100%. The rest of the design, it's not great. It's not particularly quick. It's not hugely manoeuvrable. You could probably do with losing something here and there. It's got okay firepower for its weight range. You know, it can knock out a little bit of damage, which a lot of people don't see. Yeah, it's a bit on the fragile side, but again, it comes to using the unit properly. And it's the first medium that's actually made it into the Wood Owner's Way. It really comes down to using the unit properly, and to use the unit properly, you want to keep it out of sight. You want to close that distance. Then you pop up, and you've got some solid firepower to put into a target as you close, and you put the axe in as well. And that's what you do with a hatchetman. That's where a hatchetman belongs. Oh, knocked the speaker. That's going to be some noise. Yeah, that's a hatchetman. That's where we want it to be. That's where it needs to be. And we are moving on to the Phoenix Hawk. A lot of people love a Phoenix Hawk. They really do. And I want to love the Phoenix Hawk. And later models of the Phoenix Hawk I love, but the base model... The base model of the Phoenix Hawk? No. Absolutely not. This does not have a heat management problem, it has a heat management catastrophe. The Phoenix Hawk is a medium mech. It's as fast as the Wasp and Stinger. It keeps up with the light mechs, the light scout mechs. It is a solid medium command and brawl mech later on. It's a nice scout mech, but if you are using its mobility, you cannot use its guns. Cannot. Well, you're using the medium lasers for sure. You can fire a pair of those off and jump and only overheat a little bit. If you haven't been hit with anything that causes problems, of course. But you want to use your big gun on a Phoenix Hawk. You can fire the large laser and you can run, and that is it. I mean, you've got the machine guns to put some fire out as well, but that is it. And that is less threat than a Panther in many respects. In many respects, that comes out as less threat than a Panther. Actively using a Phoenix Hawk to fight consistently is a problem. Now, if you know what you're doing with the Phoenix Hawk, you can make it work. You really can. The same goes for pretty much every... You make an urban mech work and it's scrap. But, no. for me, a Phoenix Hawk is a walking coffin because it will make you think you've got a lot more combat ability than you have, and you will cook yourself, or you will get yourself into horrible trouble with the Phoenix Hawk, and you will die. And I've seen it happen on the tabletop with newer players a lot of the time. I've seen it happen with experienced players a lot of the time when it comes to an old class Phoenix Hawk. You don't want a 30-25 Phoenix Hawk, really, unless it's a modified one. Yeah, there are reasons that you might consider it, but if you've got any other option, you take any other option. Vindicator. The Vindicator, for me, I would own a Vindicator. I was going to go with Wood Pilot, but I would own a Vindicator, mostly because it operates in a very similar vein to the Panther. It's just about as successful. It's not massively heavier. And what you gain in the weight on the Vindicator mostly adds to its incoming fast survivability. It does everything a Panther does. It's a very standard medium mech. And the reason it's so much better than a Clint in that role is the Vindicator basically it brings more to the table for what it wants to do. You know, later Clints, yeah, the Vindicator starts to look a bit sucky, but a 30-25 Vindicator is a solid battlefield staple. It's not just an average thing. I mean, it is average, but the Clint, which is its closest compatriot, I think, in terms of design in this weight bracket, is far more lackluster because it's just a bit of whatever have you. The Vindicator has again, like the Whitworth, like the Hermes, it has a bit more focus on a solid piece of job role, and it does it. And its focus is to be a trooper mech. This is designed to exchange some shots at range, hasn't got to get in too close to do the work, can maintain its mobility and maintain its threat value over time in a way that something like the Clint just doesn't really compare. I'll grant you it can be close, but the Vindicator, I would happily own a Vindicator. The Centurion would pilot. Now this is the archetypical trooper mech. This is basically does everything the Vindicator does, but slightly better in some respects. Its big downside is its massive amount of ammo requirement. It relies on its ammo bins. And I would absolutely pilot a Centurion. I think a Centurion is fantastic. I mean, with the AC-10, you can get hit by an Inferno and you can carry on pumping shells out of that Centurion. And it's got its missile launchers, and it can really reach out and touch mechs of a weight. And it is, again, archetypical of what a medium mech can do and wants to be. The downside is there's a lot of there's ammo on there. So there's a lot of ammo on there. There's ammo on there. It's scattered around a bit, and if anything touches off, the mech's gone. And it relies on it too much. Even if it does survive it relies on it too much to be a wood own. But it's absolutely wood pilot. Centurion is a classic mech for a reason. It holds ground for a reason. It throws hands for a reason. A Centurion is a solid design, but that reliability factor in terms of campaign endurance and the fact that you've got a couple of different ammo bins that can be touched off here quite easily just keeps the knife of wood own, and it's very, very close. I mean, you can say, you would own a Vindicator, but not a Centurion. Yeah, I can see the argument for it, but that's where I sit with it. Okay. The Enforcer. The Enforcer sits right next to the Centurion, and under the Vindicator. It is a simple mech design. It does its job, does it okay. Nothing to write home about. But it's better than a Clint. It's heavier than a Clint, and it uses that extra weight to be better than a Clint, even though the Enforcer has a big average feel to it. I would absolutely pilot an Enforcer. There's not a lot to say about it, but it's a simple, solid, steady design. doesn't have a lot, but what it's got, if you can use it well, it will reward that use in a way that, again, something like a Clint absolutely won't. A Phoenix Hawk, no chance. Hunchback. I'm going to upset some people now. It's going in walking coffin. Hunchback can be an incredible tool on the battlefield. Can be. But it's great as a distraction piece. It's fantastic if it can get its target in. I've played with them more than a few times. But that AC-20, I think, promises more than it delivers more often than not. It's got its lasers to back it up, but let's face it, it's a built around that gun. And AC-20s are hard to use right, and you don't get many chances to use an AC-20. Which, to me, makes the Hunchback a walking coffin. Because it's got one trick, and it's not an easy trick to do. Especially if your opponent's got any wariness to them. And it's too easy to counter in many respects. Later Hunchbacks, terrifying things. But a 30-25 Hunchback, it promises a lot that I don't think it delivers on a regular basis. It can, but more often than not, I've seen them outside of their very niche field. It has a very niche field, the Hunchback. You really need built-up terrain with limits mobility for things that are quick. And yet the slightly slower pace of the Hunchback, means it can be in a position where it can really take advantage of that AC-20, and I've not seen it pay off often enough, because even in limited mobility, quick things are adding penalties. You're adding penalties for moving in. You're at less than 50% most of the time when you're pulling the trigger on that cannon, probably less than 30. And again, you don't get a lot of chances. And that, to me, is bad. Not awful, but it's bad enough to be in the walking coffin bracket. I really wouldn't want to be in a Hunchback, given the choice. The Trebuchet. 30-25 Trebuchet. I'd pilot it. It's got lasers, it's got missiles. It's not as good as it gets. Gets much better later. Later Trebuchets are absolute works of art. But it does its job well. Its heat problems are tolerable for what it delivers. And it stays in the field long enough to be able to be a consistent threat. It stays operational. It's a solid design. And again, if you know what you're doing with the Trebuchet, it will reward you more often than not. Far more than a Hunchback does. It's got a nice series of brackets there that it can use to its advantage to keep an engagement rolling, and it can keep time on target, which is a beautiful thing. From Trebuchet we go to the Dervish. I'm popping it up there. I would own a Dervish. Now I know that's missiles and missiles and not a lot else, and later Dervishes do it so much better. But it is a really good mid-range brawling mech. It's got the missiles to close, it's got the missiles to come up close. You don't want it to punch holes. That's what something like a Vindicator or Panther or something's for. But if you can get it on something that doesn't like having to resolve lots of hits like vehicles, you get it on something where there are holes in the armour, or you just want to use it as a little bit of standoff firepower. It can be a mini archer. It will do those roles really well and consistently. And that's why I would absolutely I would own. I love the Dervish. I think the Dervish is a great mech. I don't think it gets enough love in many directions. I think it's absolutely fantastic. You can even have a dervish you can set on fire and he can still chuck that firepower out. It's fantastic. Okay, speaking of fantastic Battlemechs, the Griffin. Again, it's in the Woodone. The Griffin has one big downside, which if it loses its right hand side, it loses its battle effectiveness. But outside of that, it can move. It is designed to fight at range. It does not want to get close. But it can consistently put down PPC and LRM fire. Shot after shot after shot after shot. It can bounce around a little bit. It doesn't have a huge heat burden to it to manage. There is one, but it is easily managed by the Griffin. Its armour is decent for its size. This is a workhorse trooper battlemech that provides long-range fire support to a unit, and it can basically keep up with a lot of the scout elements as well. It's still got enough speed that it can't keep all the way up with them, but it can absolutely be in a position to help and complement a unit that has mobility. And I had great success with Griffins in several campaigns, especially mercenary campaigns, where we were running absolutely solid stuff. Love the Griffin. Brilliant battlemech. The Shadowhawk. I want to put it higher. I really want to put the Shadowhawk higher. But it has to go in there. It's not a walking coffin. A lot of people grade it lower. Would I pilot one? Yeah, I would. But if I had some of these other options, I'd probably go for one of the other options. If I'm being honest, a baseline Shadowhawk. It's a jack of all trades with a lot of weight, not doing much more than a couple of medium lasers. It can take a hit. It's got good armor. It's got some mobility, although it sacrifices a bit of that in the base model. It's nice for getting into a brawl. But its weapons bracketing is all over the place, and it's not consistent enough in any one bracket to really put hurt on something. I mean, its most effective weapon is, frankly, the medium laser. And I like AC5s. I don't have a problem with AC5s. I think AC5s are fine, especially, again, old Infernos and AC5 was nice to see on a mech. It had a nice range, it gave you damage with a medium laser, and the medium laser's damage was respectable. 5cm laser did a lot of work, the 8cm laser did a lot of work. But the truth be told, it's not great. It's not a walking coffin. This thing can fight and fight and fight. Does have a lot of ammo bins that can go bang, but that's not the end of the world. But yeah, it does not hold up under actual scrutiny. Later Shadowhawks, amazing. This thing has a lot of weight shoved in places where they could have it could have been better to do what it needs to do. And again, variants and later Shadowhawks really make more of the design. But compared to some of its contemporaries, I mean, Shadowhawk versus Centurion, the Centurion's going to watch it 9 times out of 10. The Scorpion is scrap. Quads aren't great anyway. There's always been an issue with quads, and they're not great. Its fire arc is massively more limited. And yeah, it is scrap. It is scrap. The Scorpion, again, it has firepower that looks good, and you can kind of keep it on standing back, and it can knock stuff down the range. But a Griffin's doing the same job, and it moves better, despite the fact that a quad mech can side scuttle. The Griffin does the same job, and it moves better because it's got the torso twist, and that's the big thing with the quads. They don't have the torso twist. They're more stable. They've got the side scuttle. They don't torso twist. They cannot make full use of those weapons packages in a way that's meaningful in a mech in this weight class. Its maneuverability doesn't give it anything over anything else, and it's got a smaller field of fire. It's just less likely to fall over. It's scrap. The Wolverine. That's going into a wood pilot. It's almost into a wood own. It's got the AC5. Again, I like AC5s. I do like AC5s, and this thing brings an AC5 to the table, brings an SRM6 to the table, and it brings everything to it's essentially doing a similar thing in a different range bracket to the Griffin. And it's a solid brawler. It can absolutely take a punch, and it can keep swinging. The Wolverine. And it will really, really reward that rugged play. It doesn't, again, the damage values aren't huge, but they're consistent, and they're consistent even if the damn thing's on fire. That's the truth. So Wolverine, I would absolutely pilot Wolverine. I'm not so fussed about owning them. I'm not as enamoured with them. I almost would, but I would absolutely pilot Wolverine. I don't have any complaints on that front. Sometimes it's a very thin line here, and we've got to make that distinction. Otherwise, this would just be one category instead of two. The Dragon. Going to upset some people again. It's going up there. I would own a Dragon. I would own a Dragon. And I would own it for a lot of the reasons that, ironically, some of the other stuff I wouldn't own. For its weight class. It's fast. This is a 6'9" heavy, or 5'8" heavy. It becomes a 6'9" later on. It's a 5'8" heavy. It's quick. It's got an okay damage output, nothing to write home about. But this manages to, for me, hit a balance between speed, the armour, the weight, the weapons, and especially, now this is about 30-25 mix, but you do have a couple of the upgrades. The Grand Dragon exists in 30-25, although this is meant to be about the core ones. But even with the core ones, a core dragon, it does things in the way that the assassin should. To me, the core dragon does what the assassin should do. The firepower is not vastly different between the two of them. I hear people cry. No, it's almost the identical of that. But the dragon positions it better, and it can leverage its 60 tons into an appreciable melee factor. It's also got some rear firing guns in 30-25, depending on the variant, which a lot of people don't like. I have no issue with the rear firing guns, because this means the dragon can run past the target and shoot it as it goes past. And I've done this a few times with them, and I've put dragons into people's backfields very, very, very quickly, and people generally ignore them because, well, there was more dangerous stuff on the battlefield. And then all of a sudden they've got to contend with the fact that, yes, there is a dragon capable of walking into melee range. It is cassetting damage left and right while it's walking into that melee range. Because you haven't got to shoot what you punch or kick. So the dragon gets in, and it can be a threat with its melee, a genuine threat with its melee, as well as putting damage into another target. And that can really upset some people, and it's got enough, it can take enough of a kicking, or that it can do that successfully. And when you get to Grand Dragons, they're even better at doing that. So yeah, I would absolutely own a dragon. Yes, it's a very niche application of a mech, and some of the niche application mechs have been relegated to coffins and scrap. But this is something that, personally, I know how to handle. I have been very successful with dragons. And they do that niche very, very well, while providing other stuff. I mean, they can wander around and provide basic gun support. They can do basic brawling. They do standard high-end, medium, low-end, heavy stuff. Not as impressively, but for what they do it fairly cheaply. For what you're getting. So the dragon, yes. The Ostrock. I don't remember a lot about the Ostrock. You don't see these very much. I would absolutely pirate an Ostrock. I don't think I'd want to own the Ostrock. Big disadvantage of the Ostrock is its big advantage is it's really arm gun heavy. if I'm remembering right, I don't remember the Ostrock very, very well at all, but I do recall that it was pretty quick. It had some nice heat sinks, decent armour, and it had those lasers. And I believe it was like 8 meter lasers. This is almost a Black Hawk, or Nova. An Ostrock is. It very much did similar stuff to that. I would absolutely pilot one. I don't remember a lot about them, but they were solid. They were solid enough to wander around and do a job, and they do it, and that's all there is to them. I would happily pilot the Ostrock. I think the heat curve was interesting, as is always on multiple laser mechs. But other than that, it was good. The only problem is you lose an arm, you've lost 50% of your firepower. Along with the Ostrock was the Ostsol. I never was as enamoured with the Ostsol. Ironically, it's got torso guns, which I've just mentioned. The arm guns, kind of suck, and they were large lasers. But it never felt particularly good. It was okay. It's four large lasers on a chassis that wanders around and zaps things. But I think it really struggled with that heat curve. Again, the Osts, you don't really see them anymore, and I'm trying to remember back to the book, and I don't have to leave the stream to go and get the book. But the Ost series, yeah, the Ost Soul, it struggled. Really struggled. Quick draw, it's scrap. It's awful. It's not a great combination of speed, weapons, and armour. Its weapons, the original quick draw all over the place. There's like an LRM launcher, an SRM launcher. It's very, very piecemeal weapon system that doesn't feel like a focused attempt to engage stuff. It just feels like an attempt to strap stuff to a Battlemech. It wasn't. I mean, it's heavy, which means it didn't make it particularly slow. But again, the distribution of what it could do just so unfocused, and not in a utility kind of way. It felt like a very, very strange space, and every time I put a quick draw on a table, and I've played them with a couple of times, they felt very disappointing. Later models, again, get better, but these felt quite disappointing. The quick draw did. Quick draw used to have flip arms rule for itself, which made it slightly more useful, but there's a lot of stuff mounted in this also. Very disappointing about it. These things just died. The Rifleman. Sadly, the standard Rifleman, and I love the Rifleman. I really love the Rifleman, but it is a walking coffin. If you're up against aircraft, it jumps up 2 ranks straight away. If it's up against aircraft and you've got mech special rules, it's at the top. It's brilliant. D2J tracking system, absolutely gorgeous. However, it's got great guns and no heat sinks and no armour. And it really struggles to reposition itself. Ideally, you sit it on a hill and it shoots and it shoots and it shoots. And if it's just using its autocannons, we're golden. But as soon as the large lasers come into play, and you're going to want those large lasers to come into play, it struggles. It absolutely struggles. It's kind of like the Hunchback in the opposite way. The Hunchback can go to town, but it just struggles delivering. The Rifleman, it can deliver, but you're usually exchanging an entire turn of doing anything with that Rifleman to do so. And that's not a good option when it's your standard option with a mech. It's really not. I love it as a design. Later models, again, fantastic stuff. But this thing, again, it doesn't have a heat curve, it has a heat catastrophe. You fire one large laser, a couple of the autocannons, and you're already dipping into its red lines, and that is never a good thing. And it wants to fire all its guns, forget about it. The Alpha Strike will absolutely cripple. And it's got its medium lasers for close-in fighting as well, which is great, but again, no. It's too much to deliver on a regular basis, which means the Rifleman is ultimately a walking coffin in 3025. You can get some, just like the Hunchback, and can't almost like the finish, but you can get some very skilled use out of it, but no. Catapult. I would own a Catapult. It's relatively quick. It's got good maneuverability. It's got its missiles. Doesn't have much to worry about primary weapons heat curving. It tries to mix some things up. It does start to really concern stuff, and it doesn't want to be jumping an awful lot as well as doing that. But it's lasers, the missiles, everything else, the catapult. I mean, there's hardly any. But there's lots of versions of the catapult, but in 3025 there aren't a lot of versions of the catapult really. There's only a few of them that see table time, and that's because the core catapult is a really dependable, solid design. It can get to where you want it to go. It will put some fire down with those 15 racks. It can knife fight with the medium lasers, so it doesn't really worry about its ammunition because it just turns into a brawler. Armor's a little on the thinner side, but you know, it is mounting some decent guns and the hardware to use them. I would own a catapult, no problem. Okay, we're getting into the last bit of this now because this has been nearly an hour. The Crusader is very mid-tier. Very mid. If you can work a Crusader, as I've mentioned with a couple of other things here, it's okay. If you can't, you will discover your heavy mech is essentially brawling like a medium mech. It is not the worst thing in the world. It is absolutely operable. It is functional. It will go for a while, but for what it could be, for what it is, and for what later versions have managed to be, it leaves a few things to be desired. However, it can fire missiles out its back arc, which is delicious with that arm mount, so that's quite good. But yeah, it's very middle road. You've got to know what you're doing with it. Okay, I know I've said this with the Dragon. I know what I'm doing with Dragon, but this is a for me. So you know, you've got to know what you're doing with it to get what you want out of a Crusader, and all too often, it's not delivering for what it is, where it is. A little bit more one direction or the other makes Crusader a much better mech, and its versatility in this instance is not a blessing. The Jaeger mech. It is better than a rifleman. Okay, the Jaeger mech's going there. As a take it or leave it. Mostly because it doesn't have the rifleman's heat issues. Depending on the Jaeger mech, it can't put the same amount of damage that a rifleman can if the rifleman presses the big red button, but the Jaeger mech can at least do it turn after turn after turn after turn after turn and not shut itself down necessarily. Also with the AC2s, which it does tend to mount, not a huge fan of the AC2. But on something that's meant to be dedicated in the way that this is to the job that it does, the AC2 can be one hell of a shock for VTOLs and aircraft. So I can take it or leave it. It works, and it doesn't have to have its niche to work. Again, if you know what you're doing with it, you can get a lot of mileage out of a Jaeger mech. But it's not a brilliant design. In many ways, the Rifleman is better in some respects. But as a general thing, and my experience on the battlefield with 3025, specific, the Jaeger mech is slightly better. Thunderbolt. It's got to go in the Woodone. 3025. A 3025 Thunderbolt is a nightmare. You see this thing on the table, you cry. Because this has got the ability to throw at all ranges, and unlike the Crusader, because the reason the Crusader's slapdash is because it's missile based, so its ammunition damage quota is all over the shop. The Thunderbolt, yeah, it's got a launcher or two. Specifically in 3025, it's got one big launcher. It backs it up with lasers of large and not so large varieties, and a couple of machine guns as well for anti-infantry clearance. It's solid. The armor is good. Heat management is good. Not perfect, but you don't see perfect in 3025. Heat management is part of the game, and the Thunderbolt can ride its curve right through your enemy. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care. This thing slaps. Thunderbolt would own lots of. Not as bouncy as a catapult until later on, but it doesn't have to be. This thing absolutely tears things apart. The Archer. Yeah, it's another Wood-own. There's a lot of Wood-owns going on. Wood-own the Archer's reason it was considered in 3025 in lore, and on a lot of tables, actually one of the best mechs constructed. It's 220 racks. Okay, it has a bit of a heat curve issue to learn, but it's 220 racks. Yeah, it's got lasers at the front and lasers at the back, so you get close to an Archer, it can fend you off with its lasers. It's not a massive amount of fending, but as I said right at the start of this, respect the medium laser. Archer's got 4 of them, 2 at the front, 2 at the back. And those 2 other M20s. Yeah, it struggles a little bit on the heat curve, but it does that one job, it does very well. Again, the ammo dependency is an issue, and it almost pushes it into good pilot for me. But it's solid. It's absolutely solid. The Archer does its job. And if you know what you're doing with an Archer, or you have a vague idea what you're doing with an Archer, it's very hard to go wrong with them. And later models are just insane. Grasshopper. I wouldn't own a Grasshopper, but I would pilot one. It's got manoeuvrability. It's got a couple of big guns. It's got a big gun. It's got a few smaller guns. And it tends to surprise the hell out of people. It tends to ride its heat curve very well, which means it can put the right weapons in the right place at the right time to do a job in the mid-range that a lot of other mechs just aren't ready for. So a lot of people get surprised by a Grasshopper. Doesn't, again, not fancy in any way, but it absolutely gets in there and does its job. I'm very short of the Wood-own, but I don't tend to take them an awful lot unless there's a very specific thing I'm wanting to do. So, okay, here we are, the classics. Warhammer, yes, Wood-own Warhammer. This thing can engage at almost any range. Anything that outdistances it, light autocannons and AC2s and LRMs. This thing closes, it puts holes in you, and then it exploits those holes by firing its massive amounts of lasers, short-range missiles, and machine guns into you. That's how Warhammer works. No one thinks it's the 2 big guns. Yes, the 2 big guns are very, very important on a Warhammer. We're going to be talking about this sort of thing in Battletech Tactica. But the Warhammer closes distance, opens you up, and cuts you apart. Yeah, there are armour issues. Yeah, the heat curve's a bit tight. But it can have a tight heat curve because it can ride that heat curve to do what it needs to do successfully. And if it doesn't immediately be successful, it can switch down and maintain in the fight while it cools off. And that's a fantastic part of mech design. And going right next to the Warhammer is, of course, the icon, the Marauder. Yeah, I'm a Marauder fanboy. I've got no problem admitting it. This thing has a heat curve. If you understand the Marauder's heat curve, this thing rewards. Unlike the Warhammer, even though those 2 PPCs, again, iconic to the design, the Marauder is designed to not close. It moves, and it shoots. And it can constantly fire that AC5 until that ammo bin is dry. It doesn't matter. The medium lasers are great backup weapons for if it gets into knife fighting ranges or brawling ranges. Absolutely fantastic for supporting the PPCs. And the PPCs, of course, will knock out some decent damage, especially in 30-25. 10 points to a location. Straight away, bang. And the Marauder does it. The Marauder does exactly what's asked of it. Again, the armour can prove a little bit fragile. But it's 30-25. There's a lot of armour that can prove a little bit fragile when you're trying to balance heat, manoeuvrability, guns and armour. And the Marauder will reward solid play with solid results. It's that simple. The Orion. General Kerensky's favourite. I would take it or leave it. I'm not fussed with the Orion. It's a good design. it just doesn't inspire me when I'm playing with it. This is no criticism against the design stuff. It's just I don't feel much about the Orion when I'm playing the Orion. I do play the Orion, but it's not an exciting mech for me. I don't know why. It feels very much like an everyman mech. It's the everyman heavy mech. It's the default heavy mech. It's got a big gun. It's got some missiles. It's got some lasers. I almost feel like the Thunderbolt does what the Orion does better in many respects, on a slightly lighter chassis, which is bizarre. But there we are. That's what that is. Awesome. Would own. Triple PPC carrying. Again, there's a little bit of a heat burden there, but the Awesome walks up into a firing position, locks in there for a couple of turns, alternates 2-3-2 or 3-2-3, however you want to do it, and it turns things to dust. It's not exciting, or just about the Orion, but it's got a very, very straightforward purpose for being on that battlefield. It will also attract fire like you wouldn't believe, and survive it, which is the important bit. It is a fantastic piece of kit to put out on that field. Now for a piece of scrap. Charger. I'm sorry, Tex. I've watched the video, and Tex makes a... If you haven't seen Tex, this Tex talks Battletech, Black Packs Legion. I will try and put a link up when I turn this into a YouTube video. But yeah, sorry, Tex. I understand where you're coming from with the Charger, but frankly, even though it's cheap, it's gonna die. It's not fast enough to really take advantage of its size in what you'd want that speed for. It would need to be faster. It's already sacrificing all the firepower in the world to do this. And I think you're going to get maybe one melee attack off with it if you're lucky, in practical terms. It's scrap. Especially for an awesome clap size on it. It's scrap. No way about it. Goliath. It's big. It's tough, but it is a walking coffin. You just die slow. Doesn't do anything that other assault mech designs aren't already doing. It looks cool. It's got an absolutely cool look to it. It looks so much better than the Scorpion. But it has all the problems of the Scorpion, and isn't carrying that much more firepower to the field in many respects than, well, again, like the Awesome. I mean, we're into assault mechs here, and I think the Marauder or the Warhammer or the Archer will do a better job than a Goliath, and that's just the way that works. The Victor. I'd take a leave of Victor. Victor for me is a bigger Orion in a lot of respects that jumps. It's got a bit more focus on its role. The later Victor, when it gets its Gauss rifle, is nicer for many respects, but the Victor it's a manoeuvrable assault mech that gets in close and has a big gun and some other guns supporting it, and it's absolutely serviceable, which is why I take it or leave it, but it doesn't do anything spectacular on the battlefield that's not achievable by something else that walks around out there. Now, this is where we're going to get upset again, because I got a Zeus, and my Zeus is going up here into my wood pilot. Mostly because, I just said I think the Victor is a bigger version of the Orion. The Zeus is definitely a bigger version of the Orion. The Zeus does what the Orion's trying to do. But it's got that extra bit of weight, which means it can take the mix of weapons and some of the choices and turn it into a platform that can deliver more consistently on what the Orion is trying to be. The Orion is a meh. It's a take or leave. The Zeus, I would pilot a Zeus. I'm not necessarily fussed about owning the Zeus until we get to later on where the Word of Blake Zeus exists, which is its own nightmare situation, but they are fantastic in a weird way. But yeah, the core Zeus, I'd pilot one. I wouldn't own one. But I think they do a nice enough battlefield role in the weight class that I would happily take one out onto a field and cause some havoc. Battlemaster. I want to put the Battlemaster into Take or Leave, because one of my first mechs in the 3rd edition box was the Battlemaster that I played with. It's one of the initial scenarios, and this is a brawling beast. However, it's going into Walking Coffin. You just die slow. Later model Battlemasters can do interesting things. A 3025 Battlemaster. It's got the firepower in theory, it's got the armour in theory, yet it doesn't ever seem to deliver. It has to rely on getting into a very close range to really make its toolset work. And on the Battlemaster that doesn't happen. It hasn't got this. Only got one standoff gun in the form of the PPC. That's it. Everything else is medium lasers and SRMs, and it just does not. And a couple of machine guns, and it does not close the line in a way that works wonderfully well. The Stalker. I'm torn on the Stalker. Between Wood Pilot and kind of meh. I think I would pilot the Stalker. I think I would genuinely pilot the Stalker. It would technically be a meh, but it's one of those models. It does engage at all ranges. It needs to close to make best use of its missiles and weapon set, depending on the actual variant. I can't remember which one the core variant is off the top of my head. I'm getting them confused. But I remember large lasers and missiles, and large lasers are good. You know, every range doesn't lose firepower as it gets closer. It just has to manage its heat curve. It's got enough armor to carry it there. And unlike the Battlemaster, it has just a bit better standoff firepower. You know, this is a better range brawl as it comes in, and assault mechs need that. If you've got an assault mech, you need to be able to reach out and touch. You can't afford to not be doing that. I mean, you've got the armor that means you get closer, but you need to be doing something consistently with them each turn, unless doing nothing is the plan. Again, we're going to talk about that in Tactica. But for me, the Stalker does everything the Battlemaster does better, even though they look completely different. Cyclops. 3025 Cyclops. I love the model. Love the mech. It's a walking coffin. It's got thin armour. It's got a weapons loadout that's incredibly similar to the Atlas. But it doesn't have the survivability to make use of it. For an assault mech, that's disgraceful. Later Cyclops, yeah, the Gauss rifle levels the playing field for the Cyclops. You can really make use of carrying that. But the 3025 Cyclops with its AC-20, it wants to get in close, and it can't. It sucks in that respect. Again, if you can find a good player, you can make the Cyclops work. But in general, as much as I absolutely adore Cyclops, I think I own like 3 of them. It's a walking coffin. And it's expensive. A Cyclops is not a cheap piece of kit. The Banshee. Meh. AC-10 PPC, or possibly AC-5 PPC. Few missiles. Bit of speed for its weight. Some armour. Doesn't do anything particularly exciting. It's not focused on doing any job well. It's literally designed on bringing, essentially, a mid-range heavy's firepower to the battlefield for longer. In which case, it's fine. Absolutely does a job. Compared to its later iterations, though, it doesn't really inspire, and it is a very midline assault battle mech. It just feels like an overweighted heavy in many respects, the original Banshee. Again, there's place for it, but not something for me. And the Atlas, finally, end of the list, end of the tier listing here, we have the Atlas, the almighty Atlas. I'd pilot it, I wouldn't own it. I think it's a bit overrated. It has a lot of firepower, it has a lot of heat issues that come with that firepower. It does struggle to maintain what it needs to do. Now, when it gets close, the Atlas can get close, it can absolutely do what the Atlas is meant to do. It gets that AC-20's range along with its backup weapons, and it slaps. And that's the truth. However, it's slow. It's 100 tons, it's going to be slow. It's never going to be quick. It requires the chassis to mount and use that AC-20. It's got the survivability that Hunchback doesn't, which is another good way of getting the AC-20 in. It's one of only a couple of mechs that actually mount an AC-20 as like their default design. Yeah, I think it's just this and the Hunchback. And yet, I'd happily pilot one. But it sits outside the ownership for me. It's just above meh because it's got it makes use of that 100 tons to really be a bully boy. And this thing can take a slap. It can absolutely cut things apart. It's got the survivability to get in and use its weapon suites in a way that, frankly, the Charger doesn't. Because the Charger doesn't have a weapon suite. In the way that several of the designs that rank lower than it just don't really have. I mean, like the Victor. The Victor, again, I think that carries an AC-20, but that's got a big gun on it. It's got a lot more maneuverability than the Atlas. It's got a few backup weapons, but it's sacrificing stuff that the Atlas said I never needed. And therefore I'd happily pilot an Atlas. Well, there we go, folks. Thanks for watching. And we'll be back at some other point in time. Check out some of the videos as they appear. This is only our second video going out, and it's a very early stream. And we'll be talking Tactica, movement, why engagement ranges are good, differences between some of the old rules, all kinds of things, forcing people's hands, forcing decisions, and a whole bunch of stuff. But this is my take on the 3025 Battlemechs. I hope you've enjoyed it, and keep your eyes peeled for more videos, and of course like and subscribe when that option is a thing. Bye bye for now.